Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Pi Mal Pflaumen. This odd little card game plays 3 to 5 players and has you trying to build sets of gorgeously illustrated fruit using some mechanisms from trick-taking games as well as pool drafting games. First I will go through the rules and then I'll jump into my review. A full game of Pi Mal Pflaumen lasts 3 rounds, and each round has its own individual deck of cards. At the beginning of the game, you will deal out the entirety of the round 1 deck to each of the players. Once that round is finished, we would move on to the second round deck. Each card has a strength value in the top left corner. In a 3-player game, you will play with cards from rank 1 to 18. In the 4-player game, you go 1 to 24, and in the 5-player game, you bring in the 25 card. The round begins with the star player playing 1 card from their hand. For instance, they could take this 15 here and put it face up in the middle of the table. Then, in clockwise order, each other player will play a single card into the center of the table. Once all players have played a single card, it's time to evaluate their strengths. The player who played the highest value card will take the 1, and then the second highest value will go to the 2, and so on around the table. The player who played the weakest card will get this card here, which shows a bonus of a plum, which means the person who plays the lowest card gets a plum at the end of the round. And now we begin with the player who took the 1 card, and they take one of the cards from the center of the table and they put it into their face-up supply. For instance, they might take this card here and put it face up in front of them. And then you move on to the second player, who might take this one. The third player might grab this one, and once again, the fourth player, they have no decisions to make. They just get to take this card, but it also comes along with a plum because that's what the rank 4 card shows. And once everybody has taken their cards, we look to the person who took the rank 1 from the previous hand, and they begin the next round. There are 5 different types of cards in the game. The first shows no special bonuses and has nothing in the middle or on the top, so once this card is taken, nothing special happens. And the next 4 have an action that activates when you take that card from the middle of the table and add it into your tableau. The first of these is this card here with the 3 pie cards. So once this card is taken and put into your area, you get to draw 3 pie cards off the top of the deck. They are all the same and they say plus 3.14 in their top corner. What you do with these on future rounds is you can add these to the single card you place in the middle of the table as a trick, and that will add 3.14 to that card for each of these pie cards you add to it, but you can add multiple cards if you like. Next up, there is the steal action. This allows the player who takes this card to grab a single fruit card from in front of one other player as long as they don't currently have the dog sitting in front of them. So if a player across from me took this card, they could also take this cherry card here, for instance, and put it into their tableau. Next up, we have the dog card, and simply put, when you take this card and put it into your area, you get access to the dog from wherever it was, so the person who had it now loses it and it comes in front of you, and you have the option of using this side or this side. They're the same, but different kinds of puppies. And lastly, there are these victory point cards which have a fruit mixing set on them. This says AAA. That means you just need to have 3 fruit that are the same. So when I take this and I look at my area, I actually have 2 other pairs in my area. That means I have 3 pairs. You can actually use the card that has the victory points on it. In this case, I would discard both of these cards and I would flip this over and it would be worth 8 points to me at the end of the game. And there are several different fruit mixes that you're going for. For instance, this is 3 fruit that are all different, and this is just a pair of fruit. It is worth noting that you don't need to use the card that has the victory points on it. For instance, I could grab this and then cash in this pair of figs here to flip this card over for 5 points. And lastly, if you take a card that has a set that you don't currently have, you can leave it in front of you in your tableau, and on future turns, as soon as you make that happen, you can activate it and flip the card over for its points. You can do as many of these on a turn as you like. It's worth noting that these plum cards that you get for playing the lowest card function just like any other fruit. They have no special purpose. They're just another fruit that you can add into your fruit mixes. You'll keep playing in this manner until everybody's played all of their round 1 cards. At that point, you'll shuffle up the round 2 deck and deal out to all the players, and you will keep playing as normal. Once you go through the entire round 2 deck, you finally end with the round 3 deck, and after you've played every card from this deck, the game will be over. At the end of the game, each player is going to add up all the points in their score pile. The person who has the most points wins. So now I'll start the review for Pi Mal Pflaumen, and I will begin with a couple of positive points. The first of these relates to the interesting combination of the 3 central mechanics of the game. First of all, you have trick-taking, which in general means you take 1 card out of your hand, you play it down. Once all players have played a card, you see who did best. In your typical trick-taking game, the person who wins the trick is the only person who gets stuff. But in this game, everybody is always going to get something. The strength of the card you put down is going to dictate how good of a thing you're going to get, or how many options you have on the table when you go ahead and do that, which is a very cool mix of this trick-taking playing of cards and this pool drafting style of taking cards up from the table. It's also interesting in that you don't always want to win the trick. The worst thing to do is to come in second to last, because when you come in last, you don't have any choice as to what you get, but you always get that plum. So the person going last is the person who's going to get 2 fruits compared to everybody else's 1, well, unless somebody does a steal action, of course. So I really like that sometimes you're gunning to go high, and sometimes you're gunning to specifically go low, and you're most upset when you are the second to last person. And then you also throw on top of that the reason you're doing all these things, which is set collection, trying to make different sets. And it's not just trying to make all of one kind of fruit or all of different kinds of fruit. You have full houses, you have consecutive pairs, you have several different things that you are gunning for. And so what that means is when you are in a position where you're the second to last player to grab a card from the middle, you oftentimes have a decision between a card you don't care about and another card you don't care about, but you look in front of you and you say, well, will I make a pair with either of those? Maybe I want to do that because I know that there are full houses in the deck, or just pair cards are easier to grab. Or maybe I specifically take the card that doesn't make me a pair because it seems like you get a lot more points for doing the sets of different colored fruits. So there are a lot of different things going on, and I just really like how each of these 3 mechanisms weaves in together to breathe a bit of fresh air into all 3 of them. And positive number 2 relates to those Pi cards, which allow you to modify the card that you play into the trick. You get to add 3.14 to the value, which is a little odd in general. I mean, you're adding Pi, why couldn't it be something else? And mechanically it makes sense that 0.14 means that you will never have ties, which is a very important thing. And thematically, I guess it kind of works into the scientific theme that the game is kind of going for, with the illustrations on the cards trying to look like they're in some sort of journal. But when you come back to the mechanics, I also like that these cards allow you to get around a bit of the luck of the draw. Like if you feel like you did not get enough high cards, well, you can potentially win some Pi cards and you can modify it. You can throw a couple of those on and definitely win a trick. Or maybe you throw a strong card down, but you know, like maybe you put the 22 down, but you know the 23 and the 24 are still out, so you throw a Pi card down to ensure that you're the person who gets to win it. Now, the other thing about the Pi cards is that they only add, they never subtract, and I do feel like I kind of wish they could go both ways, because sometimes you really do want to tank when you put a card down. You want to be the lowest person, and that can be kind of difficult sometimes based on the hand that you're drawing, but I will get into that specifically later. I just like the Pi card in general. It looks weird and odd on the table, and it adds some interesting mechanics into the way you play the game. So now let's move on to my neutral points, and the first of these relates to the stealing action. In general, I'm not a fan of stealing in games in general, where you just take something from somebody and put it in front of yourself and now it's yours. But in Pi Mal Pflaumen, it does kind of serve a purpose. It adds a tension to the game where that card that you draft from the middle and put into your tableau, it's not secure. Especially if you're grabbing those victory point cards and you can't quite cash them out yet, there is a tension of, will I be able to get the set and complete this card and flip it over before somebody takes it from you? And you might be even more incentivized to try and grab the dog and put it in front of you to protect it. So I like that aspect of it. I also like that there are not that many steals throughout the entire game. There's 3 in each deck, so there's going to be 9 total steals in a game, and it's likely that nobody will end up stealing from you at all, or maybe just once or twice. And it seems like oftentimes when you get stolen from, it doesn't actually hurt you that much. People are stealing to grab the thing that they need more than grab a thing from you to prevent you from doing a thing that you need to do, because the game is not very long, and so people are very self-minded. Like, it's all about what can I do to bring myself up, and less what can I do to bring the other person down. Also because it can be a little hard to tell who's winning. Like, just because you have a bunch of cards doesn't mean that you are that they have high victory point values on them. The last game I played, actually half of my victory points came from a single card. So to sum it up, the stealing seems somewhat necessary, but it's definitely a direct interaction between the players that some people might not like. Neutral number 2 relates to the role of luck in the game. This is a card game where you're going to be dealing out all the cards to everybody, and the first thing you're going to do when you pull up your hand is decide, is this a good hand or is this a bad hand? Now, a good hand, in my opinion, is one with some high numbers and some really low numbers, because sometimes you want to tank the bid and you want to have the lowest card so that you can grab a plum, so you get 2 fruit. You might not really care in that specific instance what other kind of fruit you're going to get, but sometimes you really do need to play high to have control to grab that one card that you really need. The game does try to mitigate luck by adding in those Pi cards, which I talked about earlier, and I do like that they added those into the game, but they only help you win tricks. They don't help you lose tricks. They never subtract, and that is somewhat important thing in the game. The last game I played, I never pulled a single plum because like the lowest card I ever got was an 8, and I just never had a good chance to tank a trick with it because I wasn't the last player, or maybe I played the 8 and then the last person played a 7 or something like that. So you need to know that there is luck in the game, and I think everybody's going to expect a certain amount of luck in a card game, but this is a card game with only 3 hands, and then the game is over, which is a relatively low number of hands for a card game, and you can get unlucky 3 times in a row. That's not that unlikely a thing. And you also need to know that if you pull up an unlucky hand, the odds are somewhat good that somebody else pulled a lucky hand. Like they have a much better hand than you, and you might say that it's kind of interesting trying to squeeze effectiveness out of a mediocre hand. There's some fun there, but the flip side is somebody else might play worse than you in that one given round, but still do better than you as far as getting fruit and getting victory points. So luck is here, it's definitely a factor, but I don't think it's worse than anybody would expect from a card game. And neutral number 3 relates to the card art in the game. I think it is a stunningly illustrated game. I love every card in the game. I love how they have cross sections from all the fruits, and you can see all the different stuff inside. But the reason this is not a positive point is because these cards are also somewhat busy. Like, it looks great in your hand, but when you look across the table and try to see what your opponents have, they maybe have stacked the cards on top of each other to save some table space, and you're trying to look at that tiny little icon in the top left of the cards, and while the icons are differentiated from each other relatively well, there are a lot of different fruits, and it can be a little difficult to figure out exactly what your opponents have at any given point, but in general, I just love the art. I'm really glad they went with such a stunning, vibrant theme to the game. I just wish the icons were a little bit easier to tell from across the table. And now let's go into my one negative for the game, which is kind of hard to articulate, and if I'm being honest, it might not even be real. This is just a vibe that I've gotten after playing the game a few times, where it seems like the person who plays the best is not always the person who wins. And that is a bit of a bummer. I think a lot of that has to do with the card draw luck I mentioned earlier, but I think the biggest aspect to it is just the number of hands in the game. You only play 3 hands, and then the game is over. And I feel like if it was a 6-hand game, you would have a much higher likelihood of the person who played best being the person who wins. Now, I'm not saying I think the game should be 6 hands long. I think it would probably start to feel like it was maybe overstaying its welcome in this given circumstance. So it's tough to say. Like, when you end a game and you feel like the person who won maybe shouldn't have won, that's definitely a bad thing. But on the other hand, maybe I'm just crazy, and this is just a silly vibe that I've had, and that's not as much of a thing as I really think it is, but I want to throw it out there. It's a vibe I've had, and you can take from that what you will. Alright, so now let's discuss the replayability of Pi Mal Pflaumen, and I don't actually have that much to say. I think it's pretty typical for a card game. You're going to see every card each game, and each time you play it, it will be pretty much the same game with maybe slight differences. And in one game you might be stealing a little bit more, in another game you might be taking bigger risks based off of the cards that you get. I mean, the game is all about playing the hand of cards that you receive, and I don't think anything in particular drives the replayability up or down in this case. And now let's discuss the different player counts for Pi Mal Pflaumen. It plays 3 to 5 players, and I've played each of those player counts, and I think that the 4-player game is best. The 3-player game works, but it felt a little weak, and the stealing was a much bigger thing. It's the same number of steals in a 3-player game as a 5-player game, and you actually have less cards in a 3-player game. You take out the 19 through the 24 when you're playing in that set. So with less people and the same amount of stealing, you're gonna get hit more often, which is not great. In the 4-player game, you play with 24 cards, and it seems to work very well. The game hums along at a good pace. Somebody has a dog, but you pretty much always have good choices from which to steal from your opponents, and it just feels right. The 5-player game worked pretty well. It maybe went a little bit longer just because people are thinking and you're going around the table and there's just a lot of cards down, and it is nice having all those cards in the center of the table, more options to grab, especially if you win a trick. I don't think I would say no to playing a 5-player game. I think I probably would say no to playing a 3-player game, but 4 is the sweet spot. In conclusion, I've had a pretty good time playing Pi Mal Pflaumen. I was originally interested in it because it's got this gorgeous artwork, it's got a goofy name, and it's got these pie cards where you add 3.14. Like, that's just a fascinating, weird thing, and that's kind of the game in a nutshell. It's a gorgeous, fascinating, odd game, and that makes for a fun time. I've had a good time playing it, but not a great time. I've never had that moment where you sit back and like, whoa, this is really good. I've never been blown away by the game at all, but I've consistently had an enjoyable time, and I've been consistently fascinated with the decisions that you make, and also just with seeing how the different mechanisms click together as you're playing it. I've enjoyed introducing it to players and seeing them kind of figure out how odd and fascinating the game actually is. And at the end of the day, I would recommend it to pretty much anybody who enjoys simple card games, especially simple card games that are deceptively complex underneath. But I don't expect you to be particularly blown away by it. It's a fun time, but not an amazing time. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, you can directly support the channel at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.